Hello and welcome along once again to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the podcast that always keeps its library card in date and is in fact thinking about asking to do its Year 10 work experience there. I'm Stu Joslin, and joining me as always is my co-host Alex Greenwood. Greenie, how are you, my old friend?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, a little bit chilly, as I'm sure most people in the UK are at the moment. But
well, we've got a sponsor coming up in the moment that might actually be able to help out with that, but more of that in a second. I did actually do my Year 10 work experience at my local library.
I was going to ask,
drop that in. I loved it. It was a really fun week. Yeah, fantastic.
Oh, lucky. Was it just 1 week? I think I did 2 weeks.
Only did 1 week. Yeah.
I wish I'd only done 1 week.
I went to the chip shop every day for lunch. It was superb. What did you do then if you didn't like it?
I had an awful time at Arriva Ford on Cocklebury Lane in Chippenham, which is a Ford garage.
I would have thought that would have been right up your Strasse.
Well, that's what I thought when I signed up for it, but it was there was a lot of testosterone swilling around. Let's just say that, and I was not a young man / teen who's full of testosterone myself. Mm-hmm. So it was a little bit of a clash there. It
was a bit like Glengarry Glen Ross in there, was it?
It was a little bit, yeah, but without the brains.
Yeah. Well, guys, as Alex just mentioned, we're all struggling to keep up with our energy payments at the moment. It's a sad state of affairs across the country. But we are pleased to announce tonight that we are able to help out with that with our sponsors for this evening, SWEB, the Southwestern Electricity Board. Listeners in the region can simply quote the code ALRIGHT90s at their next meter reading to receive 5% off their monthly bill and claim a free SWEB mug while stocks last. That's SWEB, Service with Energy. Thanks so much to those guys for sponsoring us tonight.
Oh, that's a great sponsor. Really, really much needed, I'm sure, for a lot of our listeners, and the mug will be nice as well. So you can make a nice cup of tea to help you keep warm as well. I was recently putting together a Instagram post or social media post about our What's the Most 90s from a while ago, which was most 90s football clubs, one of which was Wimbledon, of course. Mm-hmm. And it's taken this long. I'm now 37 and a half, and I've only just realised that Wimbledon were called the Dons because Don is at the end of Wimbledon. How stupid is that? I just didn't know why they were called the Dons. I didn't really think about it. I just thought, oh, that's their nickname. It's just in their name, Stu. That's my only update anyway.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Like, I only realised a little while ago why Joe Root has the number 66 on his back when he plays one-day cricket for England.
Route 66. Yeah.
I mean, that didn't click with me nearly as quickly as it should have done.
So we have some correspondence here which relate to our previous episode, which was the films of 1992. We did request that everyone sends in their choices for their favourite films of that year, and you have answered our call. So I've got a couple of things here. This first one is from a friend of the pod, Hannah Kelly, on our Instagram. And she says, Death Becomes Her. I love this film, not really sure why, but I liked the dark comedy, and it's a film that stayed with me over the years. It's truly weird and wonderful, and Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn are brilliant in it. Bruce Willis is unrecognisable too. Thank you for that, Hannah. I've not seen Death Becomes Her. Have you, Stu?
No, can't say I have, I'm afraid.
It's definitely iconic. I know enough about it to know that. And a very 90s... Well, it's not... Is that a 90s cast? I say Goldie Hawn is quite 90s. Bruce Willis definitely at his height in the 80s and 90s. Meryl Streep has always been brilliant. So, but altogether, I think that's quite 90s and a good choice. So thank you for that, Hannah.
Brother of the pod, Adam, has once again, he's in the habit of submitting an essay, a polemic. Whenever we do a movie episode, he does give us a really detailed breakdown, and can't thank you enough for that, Adam. And I would encourage everybody to head on over to our Facebook page for the full facts and the full rundown of his thoughts on the films of 1992. He opens by stating that Aladdin might be the only film he actually saw at the cinema in 1992, so he contributed some money there to the box office total, which got it to the top of the charts.
Yeah.
He then also goes on to give us his thoughts on The Bodyguard, Kevin Costner, A Few Good Men, The Lawnmower Man, Scent of a Woman, White Men Can't Jump, Delicatessen. Did we speak about Delicatessen before? That rings a bell.
I'm not sure if we did, unless it was that it was mentioned in the awards or something. But
okay, possibly, yeah. Alien 3, The Mighty Ducks, and he actually closes by saying, I'm sure you'll have talked about Reservoir Dogs as a massive film from that year, which we absolutely didn't. So apologies, Adam. We completely missed that out. And he finishes by saying, do you think I Will Always Love You is bigger than the film The Bodyguard? Do you think this has happened with any other film tie-in singles? And we think this is arguably the case with this one, don't we?
We do, yeah. And this sort of relates to something that Ruth Collinson sent us in last episode regarding the films of 92. And she gave a couple of other examples of this, which I think were, if I just remind myself, This Used to Be My Playground, which was from A League of Their Own, and Book of Days by Enya, which was in Far and Away. So big, massive songs that were arguably bigger than their film that they came from. And yes, it's difficult, I think, with The Bodyguard and I Will Always Love You, because they were both pretty big. I think I Will Always Love You, The Bodyguard was in the top 10, wasn't it? Maybe even number... Well, I don't know. It wasn't number one, obviously, but it was.
No, it was definitely up there. But it wasn't. It wasn't number one, or I don't think it was even in the top 3. But
I think it's
lower reaches of the top 10.
Yeah. But it's an interesting debating topic, that question. Which films were not as big as the songs that they spawned? I threw forward Gangster's Paradise from Dangerous Minds as my example of a film song that is like that. But yeah, let us know if you've got any films or songs that match that criteria.
Well, can I throw in End of the Road by Boyz II Men, which is from an Eddie Murphy film called Boomerang, which I hadn't heard of until I compiled a quiz question regarding End of the Road a few years ago. So that's my entry for that.
Well, like I said, let us know if you can beat those ones or anything. Doesn't have to be from the 90s. We'll open this up just because it's a bit of fun.
It's just a bit of fun. We're not going to beat you with a 90s stick on this one.
Not on this one. We're letting down our guard for this one. I did notice that Adam said in his Facebook message that the Mighty Ducks always confused him because the logo from it always looked like Donald or Daffy Duck to him, which I agree. It does look just like that. I also think it looks like in Biker Mice from Mars, there's a duck in that, isn't there? I think there's a duck in that, and it looks exactly the same. I actually used to think that duck was connected to Daffy Duck from Looney Tunes because they look so similar, and then you get the Mighty Ducks in on the act and it's even more confusing. It must all be from the same acting dynasty, those ducks.
Well, there was Darkwing Duck as well, who was like a crime fighting duck, which was a cartoon that I used to watch when I was very young. So are they all from the same dynasty?
Count Duckula, possibly.
Oh, Count Duckula.
A distant cousin or something. They're the Baldwins of the animated acting world, aren't they, those ducks?
Always be quacking.
Okay, and our third and final bit of correspondence, which is also about the films of 1992, comes from husband of the pod, Craig. He really struggled to narrow down his favourite films from 92. I think this was a big year for him, as it was for you, Stu. He said he was struggling to work out which films he enjoyed at the time and which ones he would have seen later on and enjoyed, but that's fine. You don't have to have watched them in 92 to have them on your list. I certainly didn't, and I think most people would be the same. But he's managed to get his top 5 down to The Last of the Mohicans, which I had, of course, The Bodyguard, Patriot Games, Under Siege, and Mighty Ducks. So some there that we had that came up in the episode we recorded, and then there is The Bodyguard. So someone really does like The Bodyguard. I think that's the first time anyone chose it on their list. And the Mighty Ducks again. He did also, I did notice, he was on his short list, he had White Men Can't Jump as well. So I appreciate those choices and the synergy we share there, Craig, with those ones. So thank you very much for sending those ones in, and do continue to send in your choices. Just because we've read them out on this episode and the last one doesn't mean we want it to stop there. Just keep sending them in for as long as you want, and it can be on films of 91 or 90 as well. Just we love a top 5 on the pod, so
please do. Anything you want to get in touch about. I mean, we read out some correspondence last time that was relating to episode 9, so there's always room. We can always catch up. It's not a problem.
Yeah, that's true. Although I'm pretty sure that correspondence about episode 9 was probably sent in just after episode 9. It's just we've only just hit it.
Well, again, it's to do with the post room, isn't it? I mean, there's some terrible issues down there, clearly. Yeah. If only Geoff would come back from holiday and get it sorted out. But he's AWOL. He's uncontactable. He's incommunicado.
I'm starting to worry. Yeah, I'm starting to worry now. We will be talking about the books of the 90s shortly. That is the main topic of conversation today. However, before we get to that, we want to do our regular feature, What's the Most 90s? And Stu, today I'm asking you a slightly out there one. This just came to my mind today. What's the most 90s public scare story? So I'm thinking something that was sort of floating around in the media or just through social consciousness, something that people were scared about that wasn't necessarily rational, or, you know, there wasn't much evidence for it, but it was just spreading around. People were nervous about it. People were scared. So, yeah, what did you think about that question?
Well, yeah, it's a bit of an abstract one. And normally I come up with these pretty quickly, but I really had to think about this. I had a bit of an epiphany overnight, and I sort of had the answer this morning. I want to go with ink and lead poisoning, which was something that was very prevalent, certainly when I was at primary school, leading on to just general school injuries when I got to secondary school. So yeah, when I was in primary school, it was always, oh, don't write on your hands, you know, don't let anyone get into contact with your fingers, don't let anybody stab you with a pen. Well, obviously don't let anybody do that. But there was always this thing around ink or lead poisoning, and I can tell you that I actually put this to the test, unwittingly and unwillingly. When I was in about year 4, I think, I came back from somewhere, went back to sit down in my seat in the classroom. And a kid called Damon Law, who was sat next to me at the time, just held out his pencil point up as I was sitting down. So I came down full force on the pencil. Yeah, right in the jacksie, unfortunately.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
Well, no, you can't do it. You can't do it. No lasting damage was done. So I think we can put to rest the lead poisoning from a pencil stab wound scare story. When I got to secondary school, there's one that I was told within the first couple of weeks of joining secondary school, which was very specific to our school, which was that when I was being shown or our class, I should say, were being shown the sanding equipment in the woodwork room. I mean, you will know this because we went to the same secondary school. Mm-hmm. There was the big sander to the left of the door as you went into to the woodwork room. Yeah. And one of the first things the teacher told us was that was full of fingers, where previous students had, you know, got too close to the sander or not been concentrating and had lost their fingers in there. And obviously, as a year 7 student, it probably is a quite a successful scare tactic, really, to stop you from using this. And let's be fair, it is an industrial tool, and we are 11 years old, so that's probably for the best. The other one I can remember being told by a teacher, and this is pretty much apropos of nothing. It was one of my religious teachers, I think, religious education teachers, who told us a story, and I've since looked this up, and it is an urban myth, I think, about a kid who was in an exam. You know this one?
Yeah,
you know whereof I speak?
I do, yeah.
Wasn't doing very well in the exam for whatever reason, and decided to stick a sharpened pencil up each nostril and then slam their face into the desk, thereby killing themselves. Clearly an outrageous urban myth. And by the teaching standards of today, I'm not sure that would be acceptable to tell a class of sort of year 9 or year 10 students. So yeah, I'm not sure where that came from or why she told us that. But that is the kind of thing I think about when I think of public scare stories, is the stories that go around or went around the schoolyard about various things that may or may not have happened. And yeah, that's the way I went with it. So interesting to hear what you've got for this.
Well, I'm still stuck on the pencil thing, to be honest. So she told you that. Was this in the context of like, don't worry if you're doing badly on this exam because there's always a quick way out? Was that how she said it, or was it? Oh, this exam reminds me of this time when blah 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 happened.
She must have been our GCSE teacher, because it must have been in the context of revising for an exam. In fact, I've just remembered I was doing a mock RE GCSE exam, and I had a blood blister on my right index finger where a mic stand had come down on it, the week previously, and I'm afraid it burst all over the exam because it was right on the sort of the tip of my finger, and where I just gripped the pen. Yeah, one of the few exams they were able to verify by DNA, I think. This has really taken a turn, hasn't it? I'm sorry, everybody.
Another way to get out of an exam is to hold a sharpened pencil on above the seat of the person next to you. And then when they sit down on it, all hell breaks out and you can get out of the exam.
Well, the simplest way to get out of an exam, of course, is for your mobile phone to ring during the exam, which happened to another kid in my year during one of my GCSEs. It was during the days of polyphonic ringtones. and he had Dry Your Eyes by The Streets, which was his polyphonic ringtone, and he got kicked out of the exam.
Oh.
I'm well aware that we're first of all we're straying away from the 90s, and we're straying away from the subject matter in hand here. So yeah, what have you got, mate? Sorry, I've digressed.
Well, I've got something to suggest here that I've always been intrigued by. And I often ask people whether they know what I'm talking about or remember this, because my public scare story is rotary washing lines, and it's a fairly vague memory. Well, it's a really vague memory because I can't really remember any details about it. But I just recall that back in the day, there was a thing about rotary washing lines that meant people were a bit iffy about them. And it was because there was some danger to children regarding them. So by rotary washing lines, I'm guessing people know what I mean. Mm-hmm. The ones that sort of, you put a metal post in your garden and then it's like an upside down umbrella, basically. It would fold out and it spins round and you can hang your washing on it. But I think it was to do with children hanging themselves on it by mistake, like jumping off something and then getting caught.
Getting tangled,
yeah. I think, yeah. And I stupidly forgot to ask my housemate before we're doing this call because I think he did do this. I think he was wearing a cape dressed as Batman or something and jumped off something and half hung himself. I'm not sure if that was off a rotary washing line. But I'm sure I remember that being a thing. I don't know if it was just my parents who said it. I did have a quick look online before recording because I wanted to see if there was anything about it. And there wasn't much. I found on something called, or a blog called nannyknowsbest.blogspot. This was from 2009. And the author of this piece, presumably Nanny, said that now that summer seems to be finally on its way, there will be many Brits preparing to take their holidays in caravan sites across the country. But woe betide them if they go to Sheerness Holiday Park and attempt to erect a washing line. Nanny's health and safety Gestapo have recently decreed that rotary washing lines are dangerous, and as such, managers at the sites have banned them. So we don't know why the managers at the Sheerness Holiday Park have banned rotary washing lines and how they would react to being called the health and safety Gestapo. According to Nanny Knows Best, there is some issue there with them. And I also found an article, or it was on the Mumsnet message board. Someone had written a post saying that they were worried about their rotary washing line because you can remove it, apparently, take it out of the sort of ground, but it would leave a metal stump. And they were worried their kids would fall onto that stump. So that's a different sort of danger from a rotary washing line.
So you've got to have the whole thing dug out then. And
yeah.
Blimey.
And then the only thing I could find that was from any sort of official source, the Southern Health and Social Care Trust, and this was on some PDF. I couldn't find a date on it. And it said, some accidents seem very unlikely, but there are a growing number of cases of children catching themselves on blind cords or other loops, like rotary dryer, clotheslines when collapsed, and dummy strings and drawstring bags. There are people out there. Maybe these are the health and safety Gestapo of which Nanny Knows Best refers to, the Southern Health and Social Care Trust. But they are warning of the dangers of children catching themselves on rotary washing lines. So there you go. There is some evidence out there to support this. Stu, do you know what I'm talking about at all?
I do, yeah. Well, my parents always had and still do have a rotary washing line, but I can't say that I was ever inclined to go anywhere near it anyway. So if the Southern Health and Social Care Trust, what more of a reliable source would you need for this information?
Exactly.
I think we can probably go with them by the word.
And if you are listening out there, Nanny Knows Best, then you need to start taking this a bit more seriously than you have been, because this is a genuine threat, according to the Southern Health and Social Care Trust, which we at It'll Be All Right in the 90s fully back and endorse. So, just be careful out there with your washing lines.
I'm more than happy to put rotary washing lines in the ledger for this one, and throw the full weight of the pot behind any sort of campaign. It can't be overlooked.
No, you've got to take these things seriously.
Okay, so our theme for tonight on the pod, we're going highbrow. Some would say it's been a long time coming, but we're finally going highbrow here on It'll Be Right in the 90s. And we want to talk about our favourite books of the 90s tonight. Now, we should say before we start, we're talking adult literature in the main. We're not really going for kids' books because we think that's worthy of a whole episode of its own, which we'll obviously come to in good time. So we're talking about teen and adult literature this evening. And I believe, Alex, what we've gone for is as follows. We've each got a book that was written in another decade, but that we both read in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone for a book that's about the 90s, so not necessarily written in the 90s, but about the 90s.
Yeah.
And then we've gone for a book that was written in the 90s.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of format we're going for tonight, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Before we get into our own choices, though, Alex, I believe you've got something there about the books that defined the 90s. And what's your source for this one?
This is from Penguin, the publisher. I was actually looking for a list of the best-selling books of the 90s, but I couldn't, for some reason, it didn't seem to be available online. But I did find this article that was laying out what Penguin considered the defining books of the decade. I think there's 15 or 20 here, so I'll just dash through them and see how many you recognise.
Mm-hmm.
So there's Jurassic Park, The Famished Road, which is by Ben Ockery, which is one I hadn't heard of. Wild Swans, Fever Pitch, The Secret History by Donna Tartt, Possessing the Secret of Joy by Alice Walker, The Queen and I by Sue Townsend, Fatherland by Robert Harris, Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb, Trainspotting, Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, Birdsong, Captain Corelli's Mandolin, What a Carve Up by Jonathan Coe, The Ghost Road by Pat Barker, Bridget Jones's Diary, The Beach, Fight Club, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and The God of Small Things. I read that list out in a slightly odd way, and I didn't read out the authors of all of them, but I think I read the authors out of the ones that were maybe not so well, the ones that I didn't recognize so much. But there are some that you kind of don't need to say the author of, like Harry Potter and The Beach and stuff like that. There's some big names there. Yeah, they were all between 1990 and 97. So I don't know if Penguin just didn't think there were any big ones from 98 or 9. But that's the list they came up with. How many of them have you read, do you think, Stu?
It will not surprise you in the slightest to know that I haven't read any of these.
Okay. You've not read Harry Potter?
Oh, sorry, no. Yeah, I have read the first one. Yeah, I have, but none of the others. It wasn't really my thing. But yeah, I have read that. Correct. Yes.
You stopped at the first one.
I did. Yeah.
That's quite unusual. Yeah, you just weren't feeling it.
No, not really. It's I haven't really picked it up again since. It's no. I mean, that's fine. Listen, this is me.
Enough.
I bring my genuine self to the podcast. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly what we want. Yeah, I've read a handful of them. I'd say maybe 4 or 5. And of course, Jurassic Park, the greatest film of all time, is also a very good book. So it's nice to see that on there.
You've given away something for the Films of 93 episode now, haven't you?
Damn, that's true. I have. I'll bleep that out. Yeah. So, do you read? You must read quite a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. Always have been a big reader, and I'm really looking forward to speaking about a few of my favourites here. I started off with one of my shelves in my bedroom when I was very young. Had a big row of those Ladybird books, which I'd inherited from someone on wide range of subjects. There was everything there, and I used to tip into those from time to time. But really, it started when I think my dad used to go down to the library anyway in Corsham once a week on a Thursday, and then when I got sort of to be 5 or 6, he started taking me with him, and I just took it from there. By the time I was 8 or 9, I was taking out proper books, shall we say, which has stood me in good stead. And I thank my dad for that, because it opened up another world for me, which I still love getting lost in today. So how about you? What's your relationship with the written word?
I've always read, and I always am reading. I will never not have a book on the go. I wouldn't say I read a lot because I'm not a particularly quick reader, so it does take me a while to read a book. But like I said, I do always read, so I get through a few a year. I think I had a kind of a similar-ish start as well to you, in that we would go to the library. I think was Thursday the day the Corsham Library opened in the evening or something. Because I always remember going.
Yeah. It was always in the evening. Yeah.
I always remember going in the evening after dark and walking around the library and sort of going to the kids section and looking at the Tintin books and Asterix and stuff like that, and then like choosing the 5 or 6 books I wanted to get out and going up to the desk with my card and sliding them along the desk like a canteen to get to the server. Yeah, and I did love that library. I do have a lot of memories of that place, so that's probably partly why I do still read a lot to this day. So very similar to you, I think. But yeah,
not there anymore, is it? Very sadly, it's been replaced. The library has now become part of the community hub, as I'm sure it has in a lot of locations. Yeah, as we covered right at the start, I actually did my work experience in there Loved it, and yeah, very, very dear to me is the old Caution Library. Very many happy memories.
Yeah, it's a real shame that it went, but I mean, this is the world we live in, isn't it? At least we got it replaced in Caution.
Absolutely right.
Too many places just going sinking without a trace. Right, on that very earnest note, shall we move on to our choices?
Yes, I think so. So yeah, let's start with your choice for the book that you read from another decade.
Yes. Okay. So this is a book that I used to say, and sometimes still do say, is my favourite book of all time. This is something. Actually, I should have said when you asked me how much I read now. I never read books more than once, simply because I think there's so many out there that I just need to get through them. I don't have time to go back and read things twice. So it feels a bit strange saying that I have a favourite book, because I don't know, if you've only read things once, it's kind of hard to say. But it's Watership Down. So this was published in 1972 by Richard Adams. I'm sure most people will have heard of it, or maybe will know it from the film rather than the book. You'll know that it's about rabbits probably, but it's inspired by a real location called Watership Down in Hampshire on the North Wessex Downs. So there's a Wessex connection there. And it follows a group of rabbits as they're trying to escape their warren that's being built over by developers. So there's an environmental element there. And then it follows their quest to find a new location, basically, for their warren. And they encounter a rival warren ran by a dictator-like character called General Woundwort, who's terrifying. It's definitely terrifying in the film. I'm sure lots of you listening will remember that from childhood. And there's elements of sort of spirituality and folklore within the lives of the characters. So there's this whole sort of religion that the rabbits have. Gives the book this vague sense of mysticism and an atmosphere which I really like. I think the main reason I like it, though, is that I really like stories about quests and journeys, long journeys. So obviously there's Lord of the Rings. What else is there? Stand By Me, Animals of Farthing Wood books, which I also read as a child. I do really like that sort of story, and this is a prime example of it. And I also watched the film a lot as a child and loved that. This is actually an example of, I think, the first time that I realised a book could be better, or at least as good as the film, because I loved the film. Me and my brother used to watch film a lot, and my mum said, "Oh, you should read the book because it's a classic and it's great." And I was just like, "No, what's the point? I love the film. I don't need to read the book. It can't be as good." And then, of course, I did read it, and I loved it. So I think I would have read it in the 90s, and it would have been, I don't know, 10 or 11 or something when I read it. And yeah, I've always loved it, and I know a lot of other people really like it. There's sort of a fan base for it, so yeah, that's why I've chosen it. It's a book that I loved, and maybe my favorite book of all time, Watership Down.
Brilliant choice. So you don't think you'll ever read it again then?
I probably will. I have just recently started to read books more than once, but if I think I've forgotten it enough, or if it means a lot to me, then I will be open to it. It's no longer a rule that I have. It's more a case of, if I really want to do it, then I will. So one day I will, for sure.
Yeah. The Daryl Such testimonial program is going to get another thumbing then.
Absolutely, yeah. What's your first choice?
Well, I've actually reread this recently. So I do have I have a good relationship with rereading. I try and balance out between reading new books and rereading stuff. As you said, I like to leave it a good few years before I do that, because then if it's still too fresh in the mind, then you want to approach it from as clean a baseline as you can. But mine is The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, age 13 3/4, published by Sue Townsend in 1982. Sue Townsend was on our list, wasn't she, for The Queen and I?
Yes.
Yeah. So there we go. So I do have some sort of lateral connection with that list. So my mum had a copy of this, and I found it in the house when I was about 8 or 9. And I liked the cover, actually. The cover was a toothbrush holder. Do you know the cover?
I had the same copy, yeah.
Yeah. So when I first read this, I obviously failed to understand a lot of what was going on, because I hadn't hit that age by then, and there were a lot of references to things that I hadn't experienced. Adult magazines being one of them, which is probably a large element of the book. So I then picked this up again as a teenager when I did understand what was going on. And I'm really glad that I did, because I then might not have gone back and looked at the entire series, which only came to an end in the mid-2000s. So I'm rereading the series at the moment, and probably my favourite is the Cappuccino Years, which is the diary that covers 1997 and 98, when Adrian's old school girlfriend Pandora has become a member of Parliament in the Tony Blair Labour government. That's a great book. I'm also I've watched for the first time on YouTube recently. The first two books, The Secret Diary and The Growing Pains, were made into a TV series, which is excellent. Interestingly, in the first series, Adrian's mum is played by Julie Walters, and then in the second series, she's played by Lulu. And I can tell you now that Lulu's Birmingham accent is definitely something to go and have a look at. If you're not going to watch the series for anything else, go and have a look for that. But this is a book, that I picked up in the 90s when I didn't really understand it, but I persevered with it, and I'm glad I went back to it because it's provided me with a lot of pleasure in the intervening years.
Good choice. Yeah, I have read at least the first two or maybe three, probably around the similar sort of time you were reading it, and I did really enjoy it. But
well, the Cappuccino Years is going to be well spot on for you, considering the era and everything and the politics that's involved in there. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that if you're going to read another one.
I will, yeah. Good recommendation. I did notice on Between the Covers, the BBC series Between the Covers, which gets celebrities on to talk about books. This was Stephen Mangan's favourite book as well, the first one. So you share that with him. Does he play? He doesn't play Adrian Mole.
He was Adrian Mole in the TV adaptation of the Cappuccino Years.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. I thought there was some connection there. Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to move on to talk about the books we've chosen that are about the 90s. So what have you got over there for this one?
Well, this is a book that was published in 2007, so not long after the 90s, but it is, I think, about the 90s, and it's A Bit of a Blur by Alex James, the bassist from Blur. This is his autobiography or memoir, and I read this in the 2010, shortly after it came out, kind of just after uni, I think it was. Yeah, it's a sort of classic layout for a biography. It's nothing crazy about the way it's laid out. It starts with childhood, goes on to him joining the band, follows their rise to stardom and all that sort of stuff. But it's just, I think, more the fact that it's a depiction of 90s music and the life around that whole scene that I really like and makes me feel quite nostalgic for it. So with Blur, it's a band that was always being played in our house because they were my brother's favourite band for a bit. So I kind of quite liked them, but I wasn't that into them. It was only sort of later, I think, as sort of just after uni that I heard one of their songs. I think it was the Universal just came on. I think maybe because it was on the Trainspotting soundtrack or something. And it sort of really like flicked a switch in me, and it kind of like all that nostalgia that had stored up in my blood sort of suddenly came into gear. And I was like, oh, I love this band now, which was right about the time that this book came out. So I read this book when I was in that real sort of heady Blur nostalgia phase, and so it feels like there's a personal connection for me there, but it's also just full of great sort of stories about life on the road, life in the studio, the Groucho Club and all that sort of stuff that was going on in the 90s, all the other bands that were around then. And I am a big fan of music biopics. I do read biopics fairly often, and music ones I suppose are probably my favorite, and this is the best example of it. I think that I know he's a good writer. It's not one of those ones you feel like has had a ghost writer over the shoulder sort of correcting all the terrible syntax and inability to put a sentence together, because I think he's fairly bright and he's a good writer. So I think all those things combined, it didn't take me long to think of a book about the 90s, because it just came straight to my mind. So that's why I've chosen it. And I think you've read it as well, haven't you?
I have read this, absolutely superb memoir. Probably my favourite passage is when I think he's talking about the recording of Tender, the song. He thinks, I've got the perfect instrument that will go on this, and I think he goes home to get it, and he comes back and there's a playback going on of the track, and it had all come together with the choir and everything. And he says, in that moment, I knew that this was going to be a pretty big song. But an absolutely perfect rock memoir. As you say, as you say, I like to read a lot of those as well. And his is definitely one of the best I've read in recent years.
Yeah, it's great. I really recommend it. Okay, what's your second choice then? Your book about the 90s.
Okay, I had to get football in somewhere. So this is Foul Play. It was written by David Thomas and published in 2003. Bruce Grobbelaar always intrigued me when I was growing up and beginning to start watching football. He was still playing at the time. Obviously, an exotic character, being from Zimbabwe, and his sort of antics in goal meant I was always intrigued by him. And I remember picking this up in the bookshop in Chippenham and thinking, okay, I've got to have a look at this. So I had no idea of the depth and story behind the scandal that the book relates to. So for anybody who doesn't know, in November 1994, Bruce Grobbelaar, along with Wimbledon's goalkeeper at the time, Hans Sagers, and also John Fashanu, who had recently signed for Aston Villa from Wimbledon, were accused by The Sun of being involved in match fixing. And this book tells the whole story of how that came about, what happened, how the allegations came about, and then the resulting trial, which actually dragged on into the 2000s. And it all centres really around a Zimbabwean chap called Chris Vincent, with whom Bruce Grobbelaar was involved in a business deal regarding a safari camp. And then this went wrong. Chris Vincent either then attempted to set Bruce Grobbelaar up or blew the cover on his big secret, depending on how you take what's written. The book was written in heavy conjunction with Chris Vincent, so there's a definite leaning towards his side of the story, and it's really a make your own mind up sort of thing with it, really. But it goes into amazing depth and detail about what happened and the things around it, and there are some really mind-blowing things that happen when Bruce is supposed to be training or when he's supposed to have matches or on the way to matches. There are things going on around it, and the eventual way that Chris Vincent sets up the video tap in the flat and then tries to get him to admit to what he's doing, or tries to make it look like he's admitting to doing this. It's very, very intricate, and it's a great book that I've gone back to a few times. I've also recently read Bruce Grobbelaar's own autobiography, which came out a few years ago, in which, of course, he heavily refutes any wrongdoing. And he was, of course, cleared in a court of law. We should say that, of any wrongdoing also. But yeah, this is from my real era of interest in football. So this is, early 90s football stretching across the end of the decade. And yeah, for anybody who wants a greater insight into the whole thing and the way it happened, Foul Play by David Thomas.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. Yeah, I vaguely remember the Grobbelaar stuff sort of kicking off in the press, but I don't really know any details. So this sounds like a good, or possibly the best way of getting that detail about the story. So sounds really
shortlisted
good,
for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year as well. I should add.
Yeah, the connection between a betting. I'm guessing this is sort of what you're alluding to now, and now that I'm saying it, the gambling company obviously like books about gambling scandals.
No, actually, I'd never thought of that. That's a very good point.
Okay. Yeah, it's the number 2 on the list was probably a book about. I can't think of any other betting scandals now, but
don't worry about it. It's fine. We took it as far as we could. So that brings us to our books that were written in the 90s. So we're rounding up now. What do you have for this?
Well, this is a book. It's actually not one book. I've been a bit cheeky and I've picked a trilogy. And this is a trilogy that I've only just finished reading, actually. I think I read the 3rd book just before Christmas. It's the Border trilogy by Cormac McCarthy. So the first one was All the Pretty Horses. That's the most famous one, I think, was written in 92. Then The Crossing in 94. And then Cities of the Plain in 1998. So written across the whole decade. And these were the only books he wrote in the decade. He's not that prolific. I think he's only written 12 books in his whole 60-year career. So this was his 90s in one trilogy. Basically, they're neo-westerns. So they're set in the 40s and 50s, but they have similar themes and settings to a traditional western. They're all set around the Mexican-American border, and they all have similar sort of themes. There's characters that come in and out of all 3 of them. So if you read the first one and the second one, they don't necessarily feel like they're related to each other at all, but then the 3rd one ties them both together with characters that reoccur. And they have a way, or Cormac McCarthy himself as an author has a very clear style where he's very descriptive and talks about the landscape a lot, and there's not a huge amount of dialogue in the books, and he has a slightly idiosyncratic ways of writing, which you'll know if you've read any of his stuff. But I just like the recurring themes that comes across in these 3 books. So there's a lot of stuff about loneliness and loss, and also journeying across the landscape, which comes back to my thing about books with journeys and quests in the story. And then there's also quite violent sections in it, which are very vividly described. And then there's also sort of philosophy and folk tales that kind of come up within the story as well. And I think they just really spoke to me. I do love westerns, and I love neo-westerns. I love that sort of setting for a story, whether it's a film or a book or a computer game. Anyone who's played Red Dead Redemption knows how good that is. And I love the imagery. I love the way he describes the landscape. It really puts you there. And yeah, I mean, maybe I was slightly biased because I have only just finished reading the 3rd one, but it came to my mind straight away when I was thinking of a book from the 90s. And he's probably my favorite author, up there with Steinbeck, who also writes about, the American West and similar sort of landscapes. But McCarthy, yeah, he's definitely up there as one of my favorite authors. So I had to pick something from him, and well, these were the only ones I could pick because they're from the 90s. So that's why I've gone for it. The Border trilogy.
Superb. I think on balance, your choices are probably a lot more worthy than mine.
Oh no!
And it reveals a lot about our individual tastes. But no, that's absolutely superb. It's not an area that I get into a lot myself. It has to be said. My bookshelves will tell you that I prefer non-fiction, and I suppose there's value in that.
No, absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
I remember my mum telling me when I was younger that I didn't read enough fiction, and it is something that continues to plague me to this day. But I do try, Mum, if you're listening.
I don't think there's any reason why non-fiction is less valid than fiction. If anything, it's more valid. I mean, you're going to get more information and knowledge from non-fiction. I personally try and mix it up. I try and do one non-fiction and then one fiction, and then sort of rotate between the two. I just happen to have picked 3 fiction books here, but actually no, one of them isn't fiction, one of them is biography. So yeah, but I definitely try and mix it up. So don't beat yourself up about it.
Okay. Well, I've got non-fiction again for my choice. So this is Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson, published in 1995. So I first read this about 7 or 8 years ago on the first trip that I went on with my band to the Isle of Wight. So we've been a few times now, but the first time we went, I took this book with me, and I can't believe it took me that long to get into his work. Again, much like the Adrian Mole series, I've now begun searching out his other books, and I sort of collect them whenever I see them, in a casual manner. This book, actually, Notes from a Small Island, was voted by BBC Radio 4 listeners as the book that best represents England. And I can see why, because it is absolutely fantastic. I just find that he has a conversational writing style, which I find so easy to get along with. And I think his writing style is probably one of my favourites that I've come across. He did publish a follow-up to this, called The Road to Little Dribbling a few years ago. One of his final books. He's retired now, sadly. He's now retired from writing. This one wasn't so well received for some reason. I'm not sure why, because I enjoyed it just as much as I had the first one. But obviously, Notes from a Small Island is the book that really sort of catapulted him into being well known in this country. And it is a great take on life in the UK from somebody who isn't from the UK. Obviously, Bill Bryson's American. And yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it. Again, I've gone back to it a couple of times since, and I've searched out his work as and when I can ever since. One of my other favourites of his is The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid, which is his early life in America, sort of an early memoir, which is probably my other favourite book of his. If anybody's out there wanting to get into Bill Bryson, that's where I'd suggest you start, along with Notes from a Small Island.
Oh, I'm so glad you picked some Bill Bryson. I love Bill Bryson's. I've read all his travel books. I've not read any of his non-travel books, but I do mean to read Thunderbolt Kid for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, as I was saying, I don't read books more than once, but until this year or last year, I'd only ever read one book more than once, and that was Lost Continent by Bill Bryson, which is his book about traveling around the States. But I have, of course, read Notes from a Small Island and also the follow-up that you referred to, and they're so easy to read. I love them. I do like travel books, and he just writes the best ones. I think Down Under is the funniest book I've ever read. I'm not sure if it was written in the 90s or just after, but yeah, it's making me want to read them now, just talking about him.
A Walk in the Woods is exceptional as well.
It's such a shame that he's retired, though. It's sad, isn't it? What do you think? I'm only 37 and I've got to live the rest of my life with no more new Bill Bryson travel books.
You'll have to ration it. You'll have to ration it.
Yeah.
Just read one every sort of 5 or 6 years, and then that should see you through.
Before we go on to the little bit of correspondence we've got on this, Stu, do you have any special mentions you want to chuck in?
Just one, yes. I couldn't leave this episode without mentioning this book. So we've already covered my regular trips to the library. And when I was 9 or 10, there was a book that I took out of the library all the time. And it's called Soccer 97. It's by Jack Rollin. And it's a little sort of pocket-sized book of football statistics from the previous season, the 95-96 season. I took it out so many times that when the book got withdrawn from circulation in the library, they kept it back for me. And then the next time I went in, they allowed me the chance to buy it. So I do have it. It's on, actually, wait a minute, I'll go and get it. It's on my bookshelf now. I'll go and show you it. Right, here we go. Soccer 97. There's Jack Rollin. There we go. That's Mark Draper on the cover, by the way. They're in his fine AST sponsored Aston Villa kit. Yeah. And I just love this book, even though there's no story to it. It's literally a list of statistics. I mean, here we go. Will Davis, born in Derby, the 27th of September 1975. He's 6'2" and 13 stone 1. Made 2 appearances for Derby County in 94-95. I mean, and that's literally all it is. Tom Jones.
Listener, he wasn't reading that out. He just knew that, listener.
It's every player here who made a professional appearance in the 95-96 season is here. And I've still got it around today. It just means so much to me. It's an absolute nostalgia trip whenever I read this or dip into it. It takes me back to a bygone age. And I will keep this book for around with me for as long as I'm around, probably. It's very, very precious to me. The Soccer Who's Who, I should say, from 1997. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. It's nice that you've got a little part of Corsham Library as well with you, something that came from there, and it's like a legacy of that time.
Absolutely. Let me I'll just test you here. Hang on a second.
Can I guess how tall Ian Butterworth was when he was at Norwich?
You certainly can. Hang on a minute. Let me just look him up.
Oh, if he was still there, he might not have been there by then. Maybe might have to be Ian Culverhouse.
No, he's retired by then. Ian Culverhouse is here, though. Go on, have a go. How tall do you think Ian Culverhouse is?
I don't think he was that tall. I reckon he was maybe 5'9".
Oh, so close. 5'10".
5'10".
There you go. But it's all here. How much do you reckon he weighed?
Oh, he can't have been much more than 12.5 stone.
11 stone 2.
Oh, blimey.
He was turning out for Swindon Town by this point, though.
Probably lost a lot of weight.
Local Swindon Town.
Yeah.
The Pod's own Sasa Churchich is on the opposite page here. Hadn't moved to Villa by this point, but in 95-96 he made 28 appearances and scored 4 times for Bolton Wanderers. Anyway, listen, we're getting stuck in the weeds here, but I had to mention the Soccer Who's Who from 1997. There you go, a very precious book to me.
So as I mentioned, we do have some correspondence on this, which we always appreciate. Husband of the pod, Craig, has come back again with his book choices. I know he's a big reader. So he said, my 90s book choice simply has to be the Sharp series. I would have started reading them about 1995. And I have a distinct memory of being 10 or 11 and showing off to a friend how many swear words were in them. I think I also loved the books because, unlike the fabulous TV shows, they weren't reliant on a cast of about 15 extras to play the entire French army, so the battles were of a more accurate scale. Definitely kindled my love of historical fiction and my fascination with the Napoleonic era. It says Sharp's Rifles, which was the first one, would have been published in 1988, but most of them would have been published in the 90s. So absolutely you can have that. Great choice. And I know for a fact that he is very much into Sharp. And he also says Tom Clancy is worth a mention. So thank you for that, Craig. What do you have over there, Stu?
Big friend of the pod, Dan Donnelly from Now That's What I Call Bullshit, gets in touch to nominate American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis from 1991. we have this on the bookshelf at home. It belongs to my wife. I dipped into it a little while ago, and I was shocked, offended, and appalled. And I've not gone back to it since. But thanks, Dan, all the same for nominating American Psycho.
Yeah, I've heard some of the things that are in there, and it does sound a little bit unpalatable. So I've never read it either. I'm too gentle on my disposition. Yeah. A friend of the pod, Requester 90s on Twitter, said Guinness Book of Records. Does that count? I guess that is. I mean, I know they make it every year, but it is. Maybe it's just because we were young in the 90s, but it feels like it was bigger in the 90s than it is now.
That used to be a Christmas present staple every year for me as well. For 5 or 6 years. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'll put the Beano book in there as well.
Yeah, you can have that Request 90s. And they also say, I was going to say Goosebumps before I saw the end of our tweet. Save that Request 90s for when we do children's books. And also a friend of the pod and brilliant podcaster, Channel Nem, said Fever Pitch and High Fidelity by Nick Hornby. Nick Hornby, very 90s author. That sounds a bit insulting actually to say he's just sort of 90s, but they were big books in the 90s. One of them, I think it was it one of them, which one was it? Fever Pitch was on the Penguin book of era or decade defining books, so definitely supports those choices. Yeah, great choices from everyone there. Like I keep saying, we really do appreciate all of your correspondence, so keep sending them in about books or films or anything we've talked about. And don't forget actually to send us suggestions for what we should do for What's the Most 90s. We've started to get a little bit out there now with our choices. So if you've got any ideas for what we should do with that, then that would be much appreciated as well. Yeah. And you can contact us in the usual way, which is on our link tree, which is linktr.ee/allright90s podcast. We will put a link to that in the episode description, so you don't have to go and find a pen and paper for that. And yeah, you can find all our social media on there, so please do get in touch.
Absolutely. Well, for once in our podcasting lives, we actually know what we're going to do next time, don't we?
We do. Unbelievable.
Yes, it's the return of our friend and resident pop expert of the pod, Joe Barter. And we're kicking off a new series. We're going to be looking at a UK top 40 from a random date in the 90s. We're just going to pick a random date, have a look at what was in the charts on that day, and see what we think, see what the runners and riders are. And as an added treat, an added bonus at the end of this show, we're going to generate the date that we're going to talk about on the next show right now.
Yes, it's like releasing the big money balls on the lottery.
But better, 100 times better.
Yeah.
So as usual, we're using our website of choice, random.org. So let's have a look, generating a date between the 1st of January 1990 and the 31st of December 99. So I'm going to press the button now, and then this will determine
the 97
that we speak about next time. Here we go. Let's have a look. Oh, Alex, the 17th of October 1997.
Oh, yes, here we go.
How about that?
Here we go.
Randomly picked out of 3,652 possible dates. So we've got, a good 1,000 or so episodes to come out of this, haven't we? But there we go. So next time, when Joe makes a welcome return on the pod, we'll be talking about the UK chart from the 17th of October, 1997. Really looking forward to that.
Yeah, cannot wait to get stuck into that and to get good old Joe back on the pod and talk about some pop again.
Absolutely. That about wraps us up for tonight then. So thanks very much for listening. As always, please do get in touch about anything you've heard on the pod now or in the past. We do really appreciate hearing from you. It's goodbye from me. I'm just off to, renew my library card at the old Corsham Library.
You know what? For the first time, I'm going to come with you on that, I think.
Oh, cool. All right. I'll see you at the front door.
Yeah, see you at the front door. Cheerio.
Bye for now.